Okay, hello everyone, Victor Momo from Excel Moments, and this is a highly requested video. This is not hype, this is a fact. I had put out a video where I showed how to insert a blank row whenever there was a change in the value in a column, but the data I used there was a single column of data, and people asked the question, Victor, what if we had two-dimensional array, a table, multiple rows, multiple columns, and based on a change in the value in one column, you want to insert a blank row? How would you approach it? Well, that's what I want to show you in this video. The data set I'm using for this looks something like this. If you look like at the date column here, you can see that the dates feel like they are sorted in some way. You see 1st of January, and then it switches to the 2nd. The moment this switch happens where there's a change, you want to insert a blank row, like you can see here. Then you can see 2nd to 3rd, you also want to insert a blank row. Now somebody can say, well, Victor, if I have 10 rows of data, I can just go through one after the other and insert the rows. Well, looks like that would work. If you have 500 rows, then you know that that's no more efficient. And the major problem is that it's not dynamic, because right now if I change the value in here from 2nd to 1st, what you notice is that this changes, right? So you can see the 1st January, there are now 3 of them and they're all stacked up before a blank row is inserted, and that's really what you want to achieve. I know the question on everybody's mind, and it's the same. Victor, how did you do this, and what is sitting in this cell? Well, I'll show you what that is. But before I do that, I want to issue 2 caveats. The first one is that this is going to be a lengthy video because I want to take my time to explain the concepts, which I feel would be important in solving some other use cases. But I will ensure to put timestamps as you go along. So if you want to skip, you could do that, but I would advise you don't. Just watch me more or less pour out my thought process and kind of follow it through all the way to the end. I'm sure there will be a lot of benefit to that. Second one is tied to the first, but that is not for kids. It's not the easiest of formulas, but trust me to explain it in a way that you would understand, give you the fundamentals and the building blocks. Then I will build it up in one formula, creating that monstrous formula that you expect me to do. But don't worry, just come along with me. So let's get into it. So the first thing is we're going to loop from row to row. So it's more like we are going, from row to row, and we are checking the values in that first column. I can use something like this: is B4, which is that set, equals to B5, just a test, and I'll get through and so on. But in a formula context, that may not be how to approach it. You may need to use something that looks like this, right? Using an index or like a choose rows. So let's select this range, okay? And say within the range, I want, let's say this is my row number, right? I just put some numbers here. So row 1 within that range and column 1. This obviously references this cell here, right? Because that is row 1, column 1. I want to test if this is equal to index in the same range, right? I can use A4 plus 1. The idea here is that if I'm comparing row 2, I should be comparing it with 3. If I'm in 3, I should be comparing with 4. So, you're always comparing x and x plus 1. Okay, so I'm testing, is this the same, right? So let's take this down. Now, everywhere you see false, it means that there's a switch, right? Like here, it means there's a switch from 1st to 3rd. That's why that's false, okay? And then you can see here too, there's a switch. That's why there's also a false. So once it's a true, it means that the two values are the same, and you don't need to do anything. You just repeat that row. That's the idea. But if it's a false, it means you need to insert, a row after. So how do you do that? I showed it in the first video, but because I want to keep both videos independent, I explain it here again. You can use the expand function. The expand function is the function people always ask, Victor, how and where do you use the expand function? Where? This is a use case for it. The expand is named aptly in the sense that you resize an array with it. So if an array has 3 rows, 4 columns, you want to expand it to like 5 rows, 6 columns, you can use the expand function. So let me show you what that would look like. So that would look like this. You can say expand. Let's pick one row just for demonstration purposes. Say this one, okay? And then it says how many rows do you want to expand to? And I say I want to expand it to 2 rows. For columns, the number of columns I have is already fine. So basically I will skip that argument, okay? So because I'm okay, I already have the number of columns I want. And pad width. Pad width is saying in the inserted rows or columns to make up this new array, what do you want me to put in there? Because I want it to be blank, I will basically say don't put anything. Okay, so that's it. So it creates the illusion of, that row and the blank row. Okay, so that's how it's going to work. So wherever it is true, you're just going to repeat that row. Wherever it's a false, then you're going to have that row with a blank row inserted. So those are the first two pieces that you need to know. Then the last piece is really what brings everything together, which is, the reduce function, because you're stacking up the rows one after the other. But what you're interested in is the final result when everything has been stacked up together. Now, I've made some videos on the reduce function, but I'll try to explain it here, just briefly. I would have a dedicated video for reduce, to explain and show you a lot of use cases, because it's a very, very useful function. But if you check my channel, you would see me use the function a lot. But let's look at this and say we are going row by row and we want to stack the rows on top of themselves. The first time we go, we'll see only row 1, right? So let me change the formatting here. Okay, by the time you go the next time, you see row 1 and 2. Next time you see 1, 2, 3. Next time you see 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just stop at 5, just to make the point. Okay, so now, even though you're going row by row and at each stage, this is what you're having. This is like in the first iteration, second iteration, third, fourth. What you're interested in is the final iteration. So you're not really interested in what's happening in between here, because at this point, you don't have all the rows of data. If you're using the scan function gives you these intermediate values, like at each step, you can get what it results to. But what reduce does is that this whole thing reduces to this. So it's like when you're doing like a running total, the final value, the final answer, that's what reduce gives you. So in this case, reduce would give you this last calculation, which is when all of them are stacked together. And that's what you're interested in, because what's the point of having, just 3 rows when you need 5? So the reduce gives you the final result. So that's why we are using reduce. That's me attempting to explain something complex in a simple way, but that's the whole idea. So we will start up with the reduce function and then we'll take it from there. So let's get into it. So we go to reduce. The initial value of the reduce, there's always a lot of argument around this. Do you keep it blank? Do you put the first, value in there? Do you just ignore it? Well, I don't want to get into that debate. For this one, I'm just going to put double quote as my initial value. Okay. And then the arrays, what are you looping through? In this case, we are looping through the rows, right? We want to go row by row and then stack them up on top of themselves. So now, how do I give Excel each row, as an array and say, this is what I want to do? That's a little difficult, but what you can do is to give it the row numbers, right? If you give it the row numbers, just the way I used the index function earlier, you can use the index function with those row numbers to get out, each of the rows. Okay, so what we will do here is we'll try and give it, the row numbers. So first thing you may want to do is to check how many rows do you have in this range. That will be the first thing. Okay, so let's just highlight this portion and see, right? That should give us 10. Then you can create a sequence of 10 there. So that will give us what, 1 to 10. So let's select everything here and see what this is. Okay, so this gives us 1 to 10. So it means that we can now use an index function and say index 1, that will give you row 1, index 2 gives you row 2, and so on. So that's what we are going to do. But because I know I'm going to use this range quite a bit, I would want to declare it as a variable. So let me come in here, let me expand the formula bar, and let's start. So I will use a let function to say let range be what, B4 to G13. So what it means is that anywhere you see B4 to G13, now I would replace it with RNG, range. Okay, so that's what I would call that. So that's the first thing. But you know what this results to? It gives you 1, 2, 3 all the way to the number of rows that you have. So I put a comma and then I go down here. So I now go into the lambda, which is the calculation part, and I have two variables, accumulator and iterator, so A and B for simplicity. Right now, let me explain this bit. I've said this many times, but I like to say it again. A, as the accumulator, always starts up with the initial value, right? So the first value of A would be, this double quote in this case. Don't forget that this is what initial value, right? So that's where A starts from. Then when you perform any calculation at each step, A will take on the result from that step. So if you were stacking rows on top of themselves, after you stack row 1 and row 2, that will become the new value of A. By the time you stack 1, 2, 3, that will become the new value of A. So A keeps more or less like aggregating, the results from all the steps up to where it is. Why B? B is an iterator, so B typically will loop through this array. Now this array here, has 1 2 3 all the way to the number of rows that you have. So it means the first value of B is 1, the next value is 2, 3, and so on. So what do you want to do? Let's see. In the simple case, if I wanted to just repeat this range, what I would do is I would just do a V stack, because I'm kind of stacking all the rows on top of themselves. So I will take A, which would always have the value at every point in time. I want to stack it with whatever row I'm on. So if I'm on row B, I want to stack it with row B. But how do I get that? I will use an index. So index of range, if I take B, this is saying if B is 1 now, this is saying give me row 1 from this range. Okay, so you can see my range here. Give me row 1, but don't forget to put the 0. The 0 makes it return all the columns, right? Which is really why it is that whole row. If you don't do that, it's only going to return one value for you, or may even give you an error depending on how you set it up. Let's close this. This is where we start from. Close, we close the reduce, we close the let. Okay, so you can see that we basically have our range returned, but we have a redundant row at the top, which is caused by this initial value. But that's a simple problem because I can use a drop function to drop it. So you can see that by writing this is more like it's looping through each of the rows and then stacking them on top of themselves. So this is good for us because this now helps us to see what we really want to do. Okay, but before we decide to just stack the rows on top of themselves, don't forget that we have to check first of all that is the value in the date column equal to the one just beneath it. So what I'm going to do is here, before I get into this whole calculation bit of it, okay, so I'm going to do an if. So I'm going to say if, and then I'm going to pull up an index, range. I'm going to pull row B, and I'm going to pull column 1. Why am I pulling column 1? Because column 1 is where I have the date. So I want to test is the value in column 1 of row B equals to, this is exactly what I wrote at the beginning, range of what? B plus 1, 1. What does this mean? If B is 1, for example, it's comparing the date in row 1, which is this, with the date in row 2. We are talking about the rows of the data set, not the Excel rows. Okay, so this is row 1, this is row 2. By the time it gets here, it's comparing row 4 and row 5. So if they are the same, what did we say? If they are the same, we really just want to repeat the row where we are on, which is this value that we have here. If they are not the same, what did we say we would do? We would expand it so that we can create that artificial, blank row there. So if they are not the same, then let's go here and then let's do expand. So we expand that row. How do we get the row? This is the expression for the row. You probably will be familiar with this now. We expand the row and say we want to expand it to 2 rows. The columns, we don't need to do anything there because we already have taken care of that, and we say put nothing in there. So what it means is that when the value is equal to the one beneath it, it's just going to repeat that row. If not, it's going to add the row and a blank row. That's really what we want. Let's kind of close the brackets now. So that's the if, that's the v stack, that's the lambda, that's the reduce, that's the let. Okay, right. Okay, so now we have a ref error. And this surprises everybody, but this does not surprise me. Why do we have a ref error? Let me explain that here. So you can come here and let's just do an index. Let's select this range, and we know we have 10 rows. So let's say I want the 10th row. Okay, right? So that's the 10th row. You can see that it agrees with this, right? Now don't forget what I'm doing in my expression. I'm comparing every row with the row just beneath it. So now if I'm here, it means I'll be comparing the 10th row with what row? With the 11th row, right? But my range has only 10 rows. So look at this. This is the range. And I'm doing something like, 11 in here. So it's like I'm looking for the 11th row in a range that has 10 rows. So it's like, what are you referencing? So it gives you a ref error. So that's why that error occurs. So since I know, I can always come back here and fix it. There are a couple of ways to fix it. You could decide to add like an artificial row, like expand the range, just to create room for that new row. That's one way you do it. But what I can do here is I can just use an if error, and just say, okay, if it's an error, just repeat the row you're on, because I know why the error happens. Okay, so I can say if error, right? I can do if error, and then I come in here somewhere to locate where that is. Okay, yeah, that's it here, right? And then I put the value of that row. So if it's an error, just repeat the row. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, and then reduce. Okay, right, good. So now you can see that we really have what we want. Let me change this back. Initially I had this as 2nd of January, so let's put this here. Okay, so now you can see that yes, that's working fine. The only thing we need to do is to drop, that first row, which is redundant really, and that's easy. You can just do a drop. I can add it in here, and say drop, right? So drop is going to get rid of, the first row. Let's locate it. So that's in here. So drop comma 1, which means that from the top, drop the first row. We need one more bracket to kind of close this up. Okay, good. Change the formatting here, right? So now you see that we have something that works. Okay, if you change this to 1st of January 2023, okay, so good. So this actually does work. So this really what you want. I kind of have answered it, but I'm kind of not satisfied. I feel that I can take this, to the next level. And what's the next level here? The next level is that somebody could decide that they are not actually inserting the blank row based on the first column, because the way I've written this formula here everywhere, because of this 1 and 1 that I have here, it means I'm saying it's always about the first column. But it's possible that what the person wants to use as the criteria may be, a different column. So I want to create, that kind of dynamic, formula where the person can tell me the range and tell me, which column he wants to insert the rows based on. So let me do something here. So let's come back here and let's create more or less like a real function. So a lambda, I want the person to give me two things. I want the person to give me the range, and I want the person to give me an index. So what does this mean? Tell me the range you're looking at and tell me what column, this inserting of rows will be based on. What column should I be reviewing? Okay, so now let's take out, this portion. Okay, right? So the person is going to feed this lambda. This lambda is going to have two variables, range and in the index. Okay, now this place is here where we had 1 and 1, where we were referencing column 1 because of the date. We won't use that again. We will use int. So that means that whatever index the person provides, that's what we want to use. Okay, all right, so let's see. I think we have it closed. Good. So if I want to test this portion now, what I can do is I can just test it here in the worksheet and say, okay, this is the expression. I open another bracket and I feed it with the two things this function needs. This function needs a range and an index. So let's give it a range. So let's say this is the range, and let's give it an index. We can still use index 1, which will mean column 1. Okay, so it gives us exactly the same. Let's change this index to 2, which means it's now using the location column. Okay, so you can see because of the location column, the data isn't sorted, so everything is just inserting a blank row after everything. Let me change this to Abuja. So see what would happen here. These two rows will come together, right? And then you have a blank after. Let's press enter there. Okay, so you see, because it's now sorting based on Abuja, it's no more sorting based on what? On the dates, because I said the index should be what? The index should be 2. If I say the index is 3, it means it's going to be sorting based on the item. Okay, so if this happens to be bags as well, what happens? Those 3, you can see that those 3 rows are together, and then there's a blank row, in between, and it goes on that way. So this is better than what we had before, in the sense that now, we have it a little, dynamic, and the user has the ability to fit it to whatever data set they have. The good thing is that you don't need to bother the user with this whole expression. The person just needs to give us a range, and an index. That's all we need. Okay, now the next part, which I think would finally just make it make sense, is sometimes, yes, the person gives you, the range. Yeah, but the column the person chooses, the data is not sorted. And maybe what you really want to do is you want to sort the data before inserting the row. So it means you want to sort by that column. So if the person says he's using location column, for example, you want to sort based on location, right? And then insert the rows. At least that way, when you sort, data that is similar will be together, and you won't just be having blank rows, everywhere. So let's fix that part. So what it means is that when the person gives you, the range, what you really want to be using for all these your calculations is not really, a range. Is you want to be using the sorted range. So just because I don't want to change all this, so everywhere I have range here, I want to keep them as the same. So let me call the first value the person gets as, let me call it old range, right? I'm going to go in here. So once the person has given us, the old range and the index, what I want to do is I will now create another variable. I will call the variable range, which is now really my range. And the range would be a sort. So I'm going to sort, whatever range the person gave me based on the index. So if the person says column 2, is going to sort it based on 2, and I want to sort it, ascending. So what this means is that if the person gives us this range and says he wants to insert the blank rows based on location column, I would first of all sort this data based on, location, so that all the similar locations are together before the rows are inserted. So let me expand this formula bar one more time. I guess we are almost there. Okay, so close. Yes. So now let's now see. No, we don't need that bracket here. This was when we were testing. So this is where that bracket should be. Yeah, good. So now if the person gives me, the range and the location as 2, or sorry, the index as 2, then it means it's going to use the location. So let's do this. So you can see that automatically it has sorted this based on Abuja. So you can see Abuja are together. Let me change this to London. See what will happen. So do you see where you have 2 Londons together? So it's sorting the data based on the fact that the person says he wants to use column 2. Let's change this from column 2, to column 3. Okay. Right, so you see what it does. It sorted column 3, so you see all the bags are together, biros are together, brooms are together, and so on. So this is way more dynamic. So if you wanted to then use this, what you could do is you now copy this into the name manager. You could use the advanced formula editor, which I know a lot of people like to use, but I still like to keep things old school here. And you just create a function maybe that is called blank insert blank, right? And the 2 things that the person needs to feed it with would be what? The range, and the index. Yes, this name doesn't look like the best of names, old range, right? But I just didn't want to go around changing a lot of things in my formula. That's why I stuck with it that way. But the point is, the user gives us 2 inputs, the range and then the index, and based on that we can insert the blank rows, and the blank rows are dynamic based on whatever column the person chooses. This for me is a very elegant solution. I'm missing only one thing, but I won't sweat it, which is just to have the headers inserted on top, which a VStack can fix. But that wasn't really my focus here. It was really about inserting the blank rows. But this is an expression that you can use. I know I've made it more dynamic. You can stick with it without having that complexity, but I think this is more robust as a solution. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. Thank you for staying true. It wasn't also easy sitting through to record it. Okay. And hopefully you can also subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. For now, I'm out.